Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kawale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
Let's start here in the United States. This is a convention season. There's a lot of excitement across the board. The Democrats just concluded their own convention where they officially nominated former Vice President Joe Biden to be the flag bearer for the Democratic Party with his VP Kamala Harris. The Republicans' convention kicks off this week, and what a contrast. It's a very, very interesting week going forward. Let's start there, Shaka.
Yes, you are right that when it comes to American politics, which are obviously the moral equivalent of the major leagues of politics, this is convention season. And that means that this is an opportunity for the two respective parties to officially launch their presidential candidate who is going to compete for the largest political prize in the United States and perhaps the world come November 3rd. The beginning of the Republican National Convention, while of course, as you rightly said, last week was the Democratic Party convention, which apparently ended on a very good note. I say that because it actually, for the first time, emerged as one of those few times when the party is largely united, and also it was an opportunity for the party to apparently welcome a lot of what is sometimes referred to as the Republican Party refugees into the party fold, when some of the key players, the major political hitters, like the former U.S. Secretary of State and first African American chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Colin Powell, actually had an opportunity to address the Democratic Party convention. We are looking forward this evening to a Republican Party convention which reportedly will be dominated by President Donald J. Trump and his family.
Very interesting analysis, Shaka. When you look at the two, when you just referenced the lineup at the Democratic Convention and the lineup coming up for the Republican Party. So when you look at these two, in terms of who they positioned to be the face or to convey that message for the Democrats, and you juxtapose that to the Republican Party, what stands out for you?
What struck me, Ndugu Paul, really, is that this time around, we seem to be going for a uniquely different type of election. It could, in fact, according to a lot of pundits, turn out to be perhaps an election for the ages. I am saying that because I have been here for the last 44 years. I frankly have never seen this type of convention as far as the Democratic Party is concerned. You are talking about a party that clearly demonstrated that it was united. And I say this because 4 years ago, when it was Republican candidate Donald J. Trump vis-a-vis Democratic Party presidential candidate Hillary Rodham Clinton, the party was very divided. It was divided between Clinton and Senator Bernie Sanders and his supporters. But this time around, Ndugu Paul, not only did the people like Bernie Sanders actually have a great opportunity to interact with their supporters and the country during the convention, but even their supporters and even Bernie supporters' colleagues, when they were running in the Democratic Party primaries for the presidential prize, they all came together and they were moderated by one of their colleagues, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. It was very interesting to look at that type of gesture. It was very clear that the party had finally decided to put the interests of the country above the party and above the individuals.
You just talked about the Democratic Party being united as as one front. How about the Republican Party? A lot of Republicans, former government officials, former governors, are coming out to support the Democrats. Does that mean that the Republican Party itself is not united?
There is no question about the fact that there is no such a thing as we talk as the Republican Party. If you really were to follow conventional wisdom, it looks rather right now like a faction of President Donald J. Trump and his family and his base, which is made up of who sometimes are referred to as the nationalist Americans. We're talking about people who are said to be extremely conservative, uh, not college educated, normally would be characterized as the traditional blue collar workers. When you talk about the conventional Republican Party, it looks like just like the Democratic Party flag bearer Joe Biden has said that this election is about fighting for the soul of America. The Republican Party members, in fact, have been talking about why, after the election, they should actually be coming together, fighting for the soul of the Republican Party. That is perhaps the reason I said that the Democratic Party has never been more united than ever before is largely because, as I said earlier, it featured a lot of prominent members of the Republican Party. I talked about General Colin Powell, at one time America's top soldier, America's top diplomat, but it also featured, as you rightly said, several former Republican governors, including Governor John Kasich of the great state of Ohio. It also, in fact, has been endorsed by 73 senior national security former officials of the Republican Party. I've never seen anything like this, to be honest with you, Paul. To see a rival political party receiving refugees from its competitor. I've never seen anything like this. This is not the type of election that we are used to. In fact, those Republican, quote unquote, political refugees said that it has come a time when all Americans should rise above parochialism, rise above petty party politics, should rise above individual political interests, and actually focus on the fact that the United States of America is the single most important thing in anybody's mind. So they decided, in fact, to put the interests of the country, the interests of the republic, over and above any other political, parochial, personal interests.
Let me follow up a little bit on what you said. You characterized the base or some of the fans or the supporters of the current President Donald Trump as conservatives who are not college educated. But there are those who argue that maybe that's a mischaracterization. There are a lot of people who genuinely support the Republican Party, who genuinely support the president, who are highly educated
Yeah,
across all
first
sections.
of all, I advisedly use the word generally. So I think that really covers everything else. I am not talking about everybody here.
I guess at the end of the day, it's just semantics, right?
Well, it's probably even more than semantics because, unfortunately, I don't think that he has many followers on his side who can claim college education and above. There are some. And of course, we should add here that he is supported largely by the members of his immediate family. But even his own family is not entirely united. As a matter of fact, Mary Trump, one of his nieces, has written a bestseller. It is selling millions and millions of simply
Copies, yeah.
because she has written some information that exposes the president to such an extent that it has even caused some people to pretty much cut and run and head for the nearest political tall grass. You are also talking about his own sister, his big sister, who in fact is very highly educated, by the way.
A former
His
judge.
niece,
Yeah.
his niece, by the way, has a PhD to boot in psychology. And then his elder sister is a former federal judge. So she actually has a JD, a law degree to boot. The big sister judge. The big sister judge, she has also been caught on tape talking about how, for example, when President Donald J. Trump was a young man and was attending Fordham University in New York, Manhattan, he wanted to transfer to the Ivy League, University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton, the
Wharton
Wharton
School of Business.
School of Business. And guess what? He apparently sold services of someone else.
A mercenary.
An academic mercenary. He sort of became an academic mercenary, somebody said, to the extent that someone else sat for his scholastic aptitude tests in order to gain entry in that Ivy League. So you are even talking about a family here, which is not entirely united, let alone the conventional Republican Party as we have come to know it.
Speaking about the political tall grass, people heading for the political tall grass, let's go to West Africa, where in the last week or so, things have unfolded in Mali. Former President Boubacar Keita was ousted by a junta group of young, energetic army officers. Your thoughts on that?
I can only say here that the events in Mali, and indeed in Africa and in the world, are following and keeping in times with the rules and the laws of nature. Society, as you know, is not static, it is dynamic. And so are people. When you talk about Mali, you're talking about a country where young people came together because they felt that their president, Keita, their government, was denying them what they felt that was their inalienable rights: social, economic, political justice for all. And so they took to the streets and did what the great American preacher, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., once said, that protests are essentially a language of the unheard, and is the kind of effort that no one can ignore. Those protests, by the way, also triggered support from elements of the Malian National Army and security forces. And so the two came together and eventually decided to remove the government of Kaita.
These young military officers earlier this week or over the weekend had very optimistic meetings with leaders from ECOWAS, led by Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan. The leaders agreed that yes, they are going to release a former president and some of the senior government people who are arrested, who are in their custody. Your thoughts?
Well, to be honest with you, I think that the gentleman who you say is chairing those talks, representing ECOWAS, which is a regional political grouping of West African states, Goodluck Jonathan, has the kind of credibility and moral political authority, especially given that he is one of those pioneer heads of state in West Africa and indeed the continent who actually organized an election, lost it, and conceded defeat with grace. So he obviously is somebody that commands respect and needs to be listened to very, very attentively.
I should add that myself and my colleague Peter Clotty challenged him right before the elections and said, if you lose these elections, are you going to concede? He said, you know what, Paul? I'm going to pick up that phone and call my opponent and say, this is it, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that they have a smoother transition. So he led by example.
You are right, Nduguporo. I remember you telling me that after that interesting interaction with the former Nigerian president. And I actually thought that, maybe he was simply being rhetorical. I didn't know that eventually the circumstances would, in fact, present themselves. And he would, in fact, rise to that challenge and become the man of the hour. But when you talk about having, for example, a settlement in the context of what is happening in Mali, I think that it is a high time that the regional organizations like ECOWAS and the African Union need to sincerely step up to the plate and desist from simply being organizations that are there at the service of individual heads of state. Rather, they should be at the discretion of the people of Africa. And especially when they know that they have since stopped recognizing military coups when somebody seizes power with AK-47 or other weapons. They do not continue doing business with that particular individual or with that particular group that comes to town with AK-47s as if they were cowboys in a Hollywood movie. They should also sincerely stop doing business as usual when there are credible reports, observers, and election monitors that the elections they have actually been observing, witnessing, and what have you, have not, to the best of their knowledge, been a reflection or a result of what they would call an election that has been fair, has been free, has been transparent, has been verifiable, and credible. They should not, for example, continue doing business with any head of state, any president who, for example, swears an oath into office to protect, to preserve, and really, in a sense, to make sure that the document that brought him to power, to make sure that he does not, for example, come about with what some characterize as the constitutional, political shifting of the goalposts to a constitution, frankly, that that particular individual has sworn to uphold, to protect, and to preserve, so that he can actually get some more time, more mileage, hanging out at State House. They should, for example, look at the difference between changing a constitution because the change is a reflection of a national interest, as opposed to a change that comes about simply because of personal or political interests of the individual. They should stop doing business with that particular individual. If they stop doing that, to be honest with you, for the first time in a long time, it is quite possible that Africa, like most other nations around the globe, will begin holding real elections as opposed to what some pundits regard as selections.
I could not agree with you more. I've been one of those critics of the African Union and all these quote unquote regional blocs. For example, the African Union is always silent when young people rise up, take to the streets, demanding for basic human rights, really, basic services. They are always uh, quiet, they are silent, you don't hear them. But when it comes to one of their own, a club member, I usually call it a club member. If you don't have that club membership, really the African Union doesn't stand up for you. So I was amazed by how they received the news in Mali saying that, oh, they should reinstate the former president. But look, people have been on the streets for months demanding certain things to be done. The African Union was silent. And all of a sudden they're like, oh no, we don't accept this. So when is it going to be acceptable for ordinary citizens really to feel like their voices are heard?
You are right, Ndugu Paul, except that the African Union Charter, as it is, as we talk, does not have that kind of mandate, does not have sovereign status, sovereign powers. The continental organization is largely run by some of the more powerful nations or member states which are on the continent. It is run, for example, by countries like Egypt, by countries like Nigeria, those countries that contribute more. There needs to be some kind of amendments in the charter in order for it to meet the modern challenges that you are talking about. But for that to happen in Ndugu, you are talking about 54 member countries plus Western Sahara, if it were a country, they would be 55. What you probably need is to have at least more than half of those countries being legitimate democratic nations, nations that are headed by leaders who actually come to office because they have been elected and the results reflect the will of those people who have elected them, but not being elected with the results which simply reflect the individuals who count the votes or the individual who announces the results, because that particular individual had previously been appointed by an incumbent president who also happened to be competing in that facade of democracy.
Shaka, you've had an opportunity to interact with a lot of leaders on the African continent, presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, name it. You've done it all. When you talk to some of these leaders, what is it that they tell you, especially when uh, the writing is on the wall, like in the case of Mali? People were all over the streets for months. You see it across now in Ivory Coast, in Guinea. Leaders want to hang on. And you go to East Africa, the same thing. These leaders don't want to go anywhere. Why can't they borrow a leaf from leaders who have come and served the term and say, you know what, there is life at the end of the presidency?
As I said a little bit earlier, Ndugu Paul, society is not static, it is dynamic. For example, you rightly mentioned the name of the former Nigerian leader, Goodluck Jonathan. Goodluck Jonathan has recently been joined by some other leaders. A friend who used to be the president of the Republic of Zambia. In fact, two friends. And you and I called upon one of those, the founding president of Zambia, Dr. David Kenneth Kaunda. He was the founding president of Zambia. And he ruled at a time when, you know, the one-party state, which was a template from Eastern Europe, headed by a country which is no more called the Soviet Union, was in vogue. This man held an election in 1991, lost that election to a Frederick Chiruba, and in fact conceded defeat with grace. You also have another gallant Zambian, another friend of mine, former President Rupia Banda. He also held an election after serving only one term, by the way, lost that election and conceded defeat with grace. John Dramani Mahama, in fact, another friend of mine from Ghana, he also recently, as you know, held an election, lost that particular election, conceded defeat with grace. And in fact, the last time I checked, he is offering himself again to run for office.
A French philosopher, Victor Hugo, once said that an idea whose time has come cannot be stopped. You see a lot of young people agitating across Africa. Could that be the way forward?
I think you couldn't nail it better. You couldn't nail it better, Ndugu. It was that intellectual giant, French philosopher Victor Hugo, who said, "It is an idea whose time has come." So he was basically looking at the inevitability of change.
We'll leave it at that, Shaka. Thank you so much for being a great guest.
You're most welcome.